Good afternoon, everybody. So I was waiting for my nudge to walk up on stage, so that was it. Very nice to be here, and thank you very much for Simon and Sarah for inviting me to speak to you. Normally, I get to talk about compliance issues. So compliance issues immediately after lunch is probably not the most exciting things that I wish to talk about. But today is different because Simon said to me, you can talk about whatever you want. So that was even worse than talking about compliance because I'd got no idea roughly what I wanted to talk about. But first of all, just a little bit about me. My background is totally estate agency. So I started back in many years ago in 1978 in estate agency, and I probably have done every single job you possibly can do in residential sales, lettings, commercial and agriculture. And back in my day, it was all hands on deck. So on a Monday was cattle market day. And regardless of whatever your role was, you went into that cattle market. And I guess compliance was always playing a part of me because I got to be the cow inspector. And that was just to make sure that nothing sort of James Herriot or anything like that. It was all about making sure that the cows were correctly certified before we sold them. But I will tell you a very quick funny story that nearly ended my career in auctioneering. Because I hadn't been there very long, and I was asked to be the cattle market clerk for the day. So I had a very simple job. I had to sit next to the auctioneer, and I had to write down the number of the cattle, what it weighed, how much we sold it for, and who bought it. Relatively easy. And this was the days prior for any kind of technology. It was all on bits of paper that you submitted to the auction office. And all was going smoothly until such time as somebody from the accounts came and started tapping me on the shoulder and said, "What the hell are you doing?" But not quite as polite as that. And I'd been selling all these cows to this guy called Frank Shaw. And I thought he must be a pretty good butcher because he was buying every single cow we were selling. It only came to light that no Frank Shaw ever existed. And what he was actually doing, the auctioneer was selling and then saying, "Quite sure," and bang down. And I thought this quite sure was Frank Shaw. But we got over that one, and I lived to tell the tale. But that does take me back, because what I want to talk to you about is providing material information and how that can help speed up the housing process. And when I think about it, back to 1978, when I first started, we did an awful lot on our brochures. Our brochures contained the name of the seller. It contained the names of the solicitors that were acting on behalf of the seller. It contained the local authority. It contained the rateable value and the water rates that were payable. It told us about the services that were connected. And that was all back in the day. And since then, I think we've moved on quite considerably, and some things have improved, but some bits of that material information have not improved. So do I think by providing material information is going to speed up that process? I think what it will do is identify any issues that are likely to cause a delay. And I think what we need to remember that's been spoken about earlier on today, this is all about the consumer, whether that be your client, your seller, your buyer, your landlord, whoever you're dealing with, that is the most important person. And it's all about providing them with the information that they need in order that they can make an informed choice. I also think it raises standards within our industry. And I think it helps build those existing relationships. We all want our buyers to become the sellers of the future. We all want people that use conveyancers to use that firm for future legal process. So the more you can start to create those good business relationships, built on trust and transparency, then I think the greater we are within the profession to raise those standards. Now, as mentioned earlier, I look after compliance for about 1,000 estate agents across the Guild and across Fine and Country. And one of the things that we do, we call this service called Ask Paul. It's a bit like my Ask My GP. Now, as long as people don't get the two mixed up, we're absolutely fine. But it's usually about, I'm going to send Paul a question. And I probably get, 70, 80 a week on a variety of matters. And most of those are money laundering related. But the next most popular one is around consumer protection regulations. and about information that hasn't been included somewhere along the time until the buyer finds out. And then 9 times out of 10, the buyer wants to renegotiate. Or sometimes the buyer wishes to withdraw from the transaction completely. And then they're looking for the agent to pay them something towards their expenses and the costs that they've incurred. And some of those are around legal ownership. You know, how many times do I come across a case where you start marketing thinking that you've got the instruction from all sellers, only to find out that right before exchange of contract, another seller comes out that they didn't know about? How many times do I come across cases where the grant of probate is in process? Let's get on with marketing. We found out a buyer and then only find there's an issue further down the line that's going to delay matters. And then the buyer comes back and says, well, I would never have entered into this transaction had I known that all the probate had not been sorted. Listed buildings causes a problem. Construction. We had a case very recently where the property was a non-standard construction, but nobody knew that. And then right at the last minute, the buyer would not exchange. Where properties are altered, loft conversions. We had, again, another one not so long ago where a buyer was buying a property and the sellers had built it themselves. The sellers had unfortunately died, and it only came to light before they were due to exchange there was a covenant that the sellers had put in to say that nobody could amend or alter the property in any way. And the people that wanted to buy it were looking to extend it and improve it and then sell it. Well, because they couldn't do that, they wished to abort the transaction. And of course, they were looking for the estate agent to cover the costs of those transactions. Services and utilities. You know, go back to what I said right at the very start. Back in 1978, we put all the services on brochures. One very recently was where a buyer withdrew from the property because they again wanted to alter it, but there was a septic tank. And there was no way they could do the alterations they wanted because of this septic tank. So we spoke to the agent and said, you know, do you not think it may be an advisory to put in the details that there was drainage was by septic tank? And the response was, well, everybody knows there's no mains drainage in this village. So why should I need to put anything? Because it's obvious. But what we have to remember that is what is obvious to one person may not be obvious to somebody who's moving out from the area. Believe it or not, excessive noise causes huge amounts of problems. One case that I was involved with was where a buyer was buying a property quite adjacent to an Air Force base. And having bought the property, they moved in and then wanted to put in quite a substantial claim because they said there was occasional aircraft noise. And this occasional aircraft noise was causing their daughter to lose sleep. Her exam results suffered. The wife suffered from anxiety because the daughter's exam results were suffering. And this was all because they claimed the agent had not told them that there could be excess noise by living adjacent to an Air Force camp. And the biggest case I probably get is around deaths, suicides, paedophiles, convicted sex offenders that are either living or want to purchase a property. And I think what you've got to look at is, ask yourselves, well, actually, if I was buying that property, would that make a difference to me? And if we ask the room that same question, we'd probably get some say yes, some say no. But it is something that a buyer needs to be aware of. Now, all of this information, you might say, well, you know, yes, is that not sort of the agent's job to find that out? Is it the solicitor's job? But the thing is, many, many times, this information is not being established to much later in the transaction. Whereas if that information was available right at the start of that transaction, then everybody could go into that transaction knowing all of the facts. And I totally agree that an estate agent's job is to act in the interest of their client at all times, but they also have a duty of care to buyers. And it's about making sure that you are fair and transparent to all parties. So what are we doing differently? Well, consumer protection regulations came in, and they certainly have helped improve matters. If you go back prior to CPRs, we had Property Misdescriptions Act. Prior to that, it was very much caveat emptor. Don't tell anybody anything unless they ask about it. Nowadays, it is really important that it's the omissions that causes the issues. So it's not so much about providing false or misleading information, it's omitting some information which would impact a buyer's transactional decision. And that transactional decision is a viewing. So the agent needs to be able to try and establish from the seller, right at the very start, everything they know about that property. Everything that the seller's done to that property. How have they used that property? And are there any facts or information about that property which may prevent a buyer from going ahead with that transaction? Now, within a estate agency, we do that in a number of ways, usually a property information form. But the information of a property information form, I would say, ranges from a few questions on an agency agreement to a full-blown form, and anywhere in between. And sometimes there isn't the focus placed on obtaining that. Now, we try our best to gather information from sellers at a very early stage before we start marketing so that we can ensure buyers are informed. You'll also have heard about the work that the National Trading Standards Estate Agency Lettings team are doing regarding disclosure of material information. Since February, they have been working with property portals regarding information which they consider should be made available, such as tenure. If it's leasehold, information on the costs that a buyer will be responsible for. Council tax and rates payable within Northern Ireland. The price and any deposit that's payable in terms of a rental property. So this information is all going to be required for property portals and on firms' websites. And where that information isn't available, the consumer will be informed that it is important and where they can find that information out. There are two more parts to this disclosure of material information, and my understanding is at the end of that, they hope to be able to go to Parliament to get a mandatory item that agents have to disclose that. But that's only one part. There's also the excellent work being done by their Home Buying Selling Group, and they have a fantastic form which allows you to talk to sellers to get as much information about the property, about boundaries, about works done to the home, about alterations, a whole host of things which give you all that information that a buyer would need. And this is all about the consumer. This is all making sure that the information about that property is fully disclosed to a consumer before they start to take any involvement in that purchase. Now, wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful if we could work together and find a way that we can use that information and share that information? If you think what's going on in the world of money laundering, there's initiatives going on where if you need to purchase a property, you can provide your ID once, and that can be accessed by the solicitor, by an agent, by a mortgage broker. Why can't we get to a situation where some kind of property information form is consistently used and accepted by agents and by conveyancers, that's completed right at the start of the transaction, the day the property goes on the market, and then conveyancers are able to use that information for their purposes as well, so that we're not asking the consumer to do something twice. And what about if we could make that digital? What about if we could use technology so we can use that information? So a seller can provide that in digital format. Let's embrace the technology that we have available. And I know one size does not fit all. I know you will have some sellers that are not technology-based and they prefer it in written format. And I think the thing that we have to do as professionals is understand what our clients need and work to that basis. And if they've got the smartphone and they've got the technology and they want to use that, let's make it available for them. But what about if we started working together on that? And that information, I do believe, would help speed up that process, and it certainly would help cut down some of those withdrawals at a later date. And I think it will go back as well to building up those relationships between agent and solicitor conveyancer. And something that Ian and Rob were talking about earlier, Back in my day, when I worked in Lincoln, Friday night was always the night in the Morning Star pub where everybody went. Solicitors, agents, conveyancers, building societies, and it was just a social time where you spoke about cases. But you also built up that relationship with that firm during the day. We had solicitors come in and talk to us about some of the problems that they encountered and how we could help them with their process. And I truly believe it is possible that conveyancers and agents can work together and we can help speed up that process, and it can start to benefit the consumer and raise the impression and the standards within our overall industry. And I truly believe that the more we can do as a team is far better than having a government impose any regulation on us. But, and there always is a big but, I can't do anything about it because according to my son, I no longer have a proper job because I don't work in a estate agency. But all of you can. Every single person in this room has the ability to try and make that change happen. To try and work a way that we can have one kind of property information form or similar that could be used by both industries and that can provide the information to the consumer. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to make things good for our end customer and to improve the standards both within our profession. Let's for once get us off that list of top 10 most untrusted professions. Let's make us write down so we're not on that top 10 list. But let's get estate agency and conveyancers up the list where people can really trust us and they value and benefit from the service that we're able to provide. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's over to you to come up with those solutions on how we can really start to help drive forward standards and provide information and reduce that time between offer and exchange of contracts. Thank you very much.